Hey folks, Seth here. As we watch cities burn, statues being torn down, and calls to defund the police, if you haven't already, it may be time to think about personal protection. Guns Etc. has 10,200 square feet of guns, ammo, safes, and a staff that will work with you to find the best firearm for your situation. So stop by their huge store in Mesa or click on gunsetc.com and have access to over $400 million in firearms and accessories. And if you like my monologues, please subscribe to 960 The Patriots YouTube channel. Welcome back and happy July 24th. We live, I think, in an age of unreason or unreasonableness. We see our major city streets unsafe, indeed burning and on fire with gang and drug warfare out of control, or at least out of the control of those who ran for office to keep it under control, to keep the cities safe. Mayors in major cities, Seattle, Portland, Chicago, New York, they failed. Instead, they have taken it as their business to promote and pronounce on vague concepts of social and racial justice. But what good are those pronouncements when not even funerals are safe, when not even one-year-olds and carriages are safe from gangland gunfire? What good is racial harmony if those of minority races are being killed? It's not an emblem of honor or virtue that the death of any man, woman, or child is killed by a member of that man, woman, or child's same race. That is not the equality we thought we were all fighting for. This is not just a failure of reason, it's a failure of politics at its most basic levels. Start with the notion that the mayors cannot control their streets, or perhaps do not want to, and end with the fact that they attack the federal government for trying to, indeed, calling federal troops and officers stormtroopers and thugs. The stormtrooper one is Nancy Pelosi. I suppose once you make Trump a Nazi, federal troops are to be called stormtroopers. Wonder what she thinks of the Capitol Police that guard her and her family. This is the same Nancy Pelosi that has renamed the coronavirus the Trump virus. The mayors are no better, with the Chicago, Portland, and New York mayors saying things like, quote, "Under no circumstances will I allow Donald Trump's troops to come to Chicago and terrorize our residents," close quote. Just like George Wallace blocking federal troops from helping enforce civil rights laws in Alabama in 1963. Not a very good pedigree to follow, that. And I still have no idea how it is okay to label our federal troops terrorists. Stormtroopers and terrorists. But of course, when Donald Trump criticizes the politicalization of the FBI or the CIA, he is waging war against federal workers and federal employees, the media tell us. It is, we must point out, not as if places like Portland, Chicago, Seattle, and New York are sovereign entities, islands unto themselves. Aside from the fact that federal property is being ransacked and that federal laws are being broken, what happened to the notion of being one country? Why do they keep telling us it's Donald Trump that wants to divide us when they're the ones that want to self-separate or segregate? I love Hadley Arkes's rendering of the story that after the Battle of Gettysburg, President Lincoln urged General Meade to press the attack on Lee's army before the Southern troops could make it back across the Potomac River into Virginia. But Meade held back, and the moment was lost. He then, Meade, telegraphed the president that at least the Union side could take satisfaction in, quote, driving the invader from our soil, close quote. That dispatch merely deepened the frustration of President Lincoln. As Lincoln then turned to one of his secretaries, he said, "Will our generals never get the idea out of their heads? The whole country is our soil. The whole country is our soil." They are not Trump's troops any more than they are not Nazi stormtroopers. But here you have the left and the Democrats, once again, redounding to type. You've heard me talk about how they have adopted all the language and reading of our founding from Confederate philosophers and defenders from the 1850s and 1860s in their quest to prove our founding racist and soiled. You now see them redounding to type of their 1950s and 1960s Southern Democratic segregationist philosophers and statesmen in adopting the language and tactics of the inheritors and defenders of the old Confederacy, your George Wallaces, your Bull Connors, your Lester Maddocks. Not a very good pedigree, that, either, but those are their arguments. Surprise, surprise, they are still the same party, after all. The same party as they were in the 1860s, the same party as they were in the 1960s, at least the southern part of it. All very odd at a time when we are supposed to be commemorating the life's work of John Lewis and C.T. Vivian. They understood, for they worked with and marched with Martin Luther King, that it was the call to local and state rights over and against federal civil rights and safety laws and federal help that were the philosophical underpinnings of further and entrenched segregation. They were opposed to those local segregationist calls. They were opposed to the attacks on federal help for civil rights. The same language used against our federal troops today is the language used by your George Wallaces and Lester Maddixes and Bull Connors. Terrorists, they were called. Stormtroopers, the feds were called. Interlopers. We seem to be rightly celebrating the man John Lewis, just totally forgetting the cause and philosophical and historical underpinnings of the cause he fought for, of that which we should be celebrating. By we, I mean today's Democrats. I think we Republicans still know who and what we are and why, and that it is all our soil. So if I may go back to our cities for a moment, as they are failing, it is important to note that they really are supposed to be our first structure and notion of politics. That is where we get the word politics from in the first place, right? The Athenian polis, city. We used to know this and start from these basics. That's why we used to study Aristotle's book called The Politics. That's why we used to study Pericles' funeral oration. Remember that one? Where he says, quote, "Our homes are beautiful and elegant, and the delight which we daily feel in all these things helps to banish sorrow. Because of the greatness of our city, the fruits of the whole earth flow in upon us, so that we may enjoy the goods of other countries as freely as our own," close quote. Those who try to protect their beautiful homes now from the mobs and rioters, they're the new criminals, as you see in St. Louis. But I think we should ask, too, how well our major cities are doing in banishing sorrow and esteeming the greatness of themselves, as Pericles put it. Because the answer is not well at all. And it starts with a basic understanding we've forgotten, the whole point of politics. All political action, Leo Strauss writes, aims at either preservation or change. When desiring to preserve, we wish to prevent a change to the worse. When desiring change, we wish to bring about something better. All political action is then guided by some thought of better and worse. But thought of better or worse implies thought of good. Thus, political decisions must be judged in terms of goodness or badness, of justice or injustice, by some standard. And one cannot judge without a standard. Thus, we as political philosophers are in the business or have the duty to strive for general knowledge of these standards. Political philosophy is, after all, the attempt truly to know both the nature of political things and the right or the good political order. Take our cities. Are they in good order at all? To just take one summary out of Portland, quote, "Protests have taken place every day since May 28th. A few headlines of timeline on the website of a local TV station, KOIN.com. For May 29th, massive vigil in North Portland leads to declared riot rundown downtown. May 30th, curfew imposed and ignored. June 30th, police union building protest. Another riot was declared by police. Although the federal courthouse has done nothing to provoke protesters and has been standing in the same spot since 1997, it has been a constant target. Protesters have smashed its glass doors, covered its exterior with graffiti, and repeatedly attempted to light it on fire. This has been happening since at least the 1st of this month. True to form, protesters over just this past weekend took down fencing and lit a fire at the building's entryway. As a statement from the Portland police put it, quote, "Dozens of people with shields, helmets, gas masks, umbrellas, bats, and hockey sticks approached the doors of the courthouse." Not even the mayor is safe himself. He's not safe to go out and join the protesters, as we saw 2 days ago, even though he says he's on their side, because he doesn't understand what the side is. I think it's not about Democrat versus Republican. It's that the mobs are about anarchy. Awfully hard to see how any of it, is in the service of protesting the killing of George Floyd. After all, again, Portland, like all of Oregon, is a wholly owned and run city and state by Democrats. Same with Chicago and Illinois. Same with New York City and New York State. Same with every major city where unremitting violence has broken out. And so it is that while these anarchists yell, shout, and riot in the name of what they call justice, and the mayors resist federal aid and libel and slander federal agents in the name of what they call justice, we have come to the key point of higher education's task for the past 50 or so years to erase all norms and notions of good, bad, just, unjust, right, wrong, and truth. If you want to know why we care so much about what's happening in our colleges and our schools, you can now see it playing out in the streets exactly as they have wrought by their corruption of all those terms. A taught and learned corruption. Taught and learned corruption of all things, good, bad, just, unjust, right, wrong, and truth. But there is still a remnant of normalcy and normal thinking in this country. I should like to close with a wonderful example of it. I do not know Enrique W. Venegas Iglesias, but I know he's from Goodyear, Arizona. And for all I know, he may have gone to Hillsdale or studied the works of Aristotle, but he need not have if he did not, for the great and natural truths are written on our hearts before they are unscrubbed from them by our universities. He seems either schooled in the ancient truths or untainted by the work of our modern university and postmodern corruption of the great terms. He wrote a letter in today's Arizona Republic, and it bears full repeating herewith. It is a response to a liberal writer named Rivko Knox. Here's Mr. Iglesias, quote, "I finally had it with the cowardly diatribe by the so-called left-wing progressives. Done with that belligerent diatribe, that letter to the editor by Rivko Cox on Wednesday that described the peaceful protesters of Oregon. What, pray tell, is so peaceful about people stopping cars, forcing them out, throwing liquid all over them, and assaulting them? I watched television reports from across the country of a former police supervisor who is African American get beaten and shot to death by these peaceful protesters. I saw again on TV a husband and wife beaten with 2x4s as the peaceful protesters stood by. Is this the America Rivko Knox grew up in? I doubt it, and not for a second am I willing to give up my freedom to travel any street or any road by foot or by car and have some peaceful protesters accost me, my wife, my children, or my grandchildren. Not today, not tomorrow. I'm fed up with the narrative that this is freedom of speech to tear up neighborhoods and paint signs on buildings and tear down and deface statues and monuments. Enough is enough. If it takes federal marshals to protect federal buildings because the governors and mayors can't handle the responsibilities and oath of office, then it's time people rise up and seize the day and throw these anarchists in jail. They are not exercising First Amendment rights. They are usurping the rights of 90% of the American public. These federal buildings are the people's buildings. They are yours and mine, paid for by our tax dollars and not the dollars of those who wear designer clothes and still live with mommy and daddy and whose art degree gives them a step up in employment at McDonald's. You talk about consequences? There are none for these brats and punks that beat up defenseless men, women, and children. Yes, I knew my era of never having to lock the car or house, of people all helping their neighbors, may be gone forever, but I still hearken back to my days on campus where most of the fraternities charged a fine to any brother who was seen not holding open the door for a female. We have totally lost our moral compass, and until the mayors allow the police to start being cops again, we will never find it. Like Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, nevermore. Great letter. Again, I don't know Enrique Iglesias, the Goodyear resident who wrote this, but if anyone does or he is listening, all praise to him, and please call in. To him and to all he writes and stands for, let me just say, please, more, and evermore. I'm Seth Leibson. The lines are open.